So this is the fourth instalment of my series of the Royal Priesthood. If you want to look at the others, they're all on YouTube, so go and find the thing on there. And this time, we're turning our attention back to Abraham. And specifically, Abraham, when God asked him to sacrifice Isaac. Okay. If you read the accounts of Abraham and Sarai, through becoming Abraham and Sarah, they're longing for a child of their own. You'll see that they had moments of great faith and moments of great despair. Times when they trusted God, times when they clearly thought God had forgotten about them, or God's promises looked to them like they were just never going to happen. And then there were times when they just did the opposite of what God told them to do. And they showed themselves ready, willing, and able to hurt others in order to protect themselves and to try and get hold of what they wanted more than anything else, a child of their own. God promised them a son of their own, through whom he would make Abraham the father of a great nation, the people of the promise. And finally, when Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90 years old, they had Isaac. And then, sometime after they'd spent time with Isaac, really enjoying having this child, God turned round to them one day and said, "You know what? I want you to take Isaac, your only son, and sacrifice him." So if you can pull up the first verse, please, Beatrice. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. Now, just want to stop there. God tested Abraham. We're told it's a test. Abraham didn't have a copy of Genesis in front of him. He didn't know what the script was. As far as he was concerned, this was real. Yeah? There was no wavering of doubt in his mind. This is actually what God wanted him to do. And he had no choice but to do it if he was to show his faith in God. He said to him, "Abraham, here I am," he replied. Next verse, please. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, Isaac." And you may say, well, okay, he had Ishmael before, didn't he? But that wasn't the child of the promise. And in chapter 21, if you go back and read that, he'd already sent Ishmael off to his death. He'd sent Hagar, the immigrant. Hagar, Hay means the, Gar means immigrant. So her literal name was the immigrant. That's how they referred to her. He sent Hagar and Ishmael off to their deaths. He sent them into the desert with nothing more than a skin of water. But God saved them. "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah." Any Lord of the Rings fans in? Yes? Mountains of Moriah? The mines of Moriah? This is where Tolkien got it from. Okay. Bit of plagiarism there. Go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. A burnt offering. This is a going up offering. So you took the object of the sacrifice and you placed it on the fire and you burnt it until it was totally consumed. There was nothing left. And you've got to think, well, what's this about? Can we go to Jeremiah, please? So this is Jeremiah 19:5, and this is God complaining about idol worship. And he said, "They built the high places of Baal to burn their sons in the fire as offerings to Baal. Something I did not command or mention, nor did it enter my mind. Human sacrifice, child sacrifice, was quite common among the pagan gods. And it had been quite common in the area where Abraham grew up. So although it seems to us horrendous that God is actually asking this, to Abraham, it would have been a link back to his past. Something which wasn't that out of the ordinary. Remember, we're talking about events 2,000 years before Jesus. Human sacrifice was widely practiced amongst the ancient Semitic cultures. It was a common practice in pagan religions. In fact, in some pagan religions, it was a fertility offering. You took your first child, who you'd struggled to have, and offered that as a sacrifice on the basis that then you would get more children. However, we still need to reconcile what God says here in Jeremiah with what he's actually telling Isaac to do in chapter 22 of Genesis. What God is doing is showing that he's the opposite of the pagan gods. This is something which was regularly expected by the pagan gods. But our God, the God of Abraham, did not expect this. So it was a test. God is saying, I will never ask you to sacrifice your children. Instead, I will show you how different I am. I will sacrifice my only son, whom I love. Not just for you, Abraham, but for all your seed, all your descendants, all those who call on my name and obey me. What we are seeing in the Abraham and Isaac story is that instead of a man having to sacrifice his one and only son, whom he loves, God is going to take his place and sacrifice his one and only son, whom he loves. Pagan gods demand you sacrifice your sons. Yahweh doesn't. Instead, Yahweh steps in for all of us because he so loved the world, and he sacrifices his own son on our behalf. If we can go back to Genesis, please, and we go to verse 3. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took with him two of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. Next verse. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. So I want you to think about this. Abraham set out on a journey that lasted 3 days. And as far as Abraham was concerned, he had committed his son Isaac to death on the first day. And on the third day, he was going to receive him back. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servant, stay here with the donkey, while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and we will come back to you. Let's go to Hebrews 11. Hebrews is the built-in commentary for the Bible. Yeah, if you're often struggling with stuff, if there's a reference to it in Hebrews, go there. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son. Next verse, please. Look at that. Abraham took the wood. No, that's not the one. So we want to go back to Hebrews 11, please. You know, if you've not done the stuff on the desk and the computer and stuff like that, to do it first time, it's extremely difficult. Yeah, it's like anything else. If you're used to doing it, it's dead easy. If you're doing it for the first time, it's difficult. And if you're doing it for the first time when everyone's waiting on you, it feels even worse. Yeah.
So there's only half the verse of Hebrews on this.
So it doesn't have verses 18 and 19. Okay, I'll just read it to you then. So verse 18, even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned, Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so in the manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. So that's what the author of Hebrews says to us. In a manner of speaking, on the third day, he did receive Isaac back from the death. On what day did Abraham receive Isaac back? On the third day. When did God receive Jesus back from the dead? On the third day. Can we go to Genesis 22, verse 6? Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire and the knife. And the two of them went on together. Now, we don't know how old Isaac is at this point. The Hebrew word suggests that he's an adolescent. And if he's going to be carrying wood, strong enough to carry wood, you're going to assume he's at least a teenager, yeah? Verse 7. Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, Father? Yes, my son, Abraham replied. The fire and the wood are here. Are we on verse 7? That's it. The fire and the wood are here, Isaac said. But where is the lamb for the burnt offering? The black lad is looking around. They've got the fire, they've got the wood. Where's the sacrifice? Verse 8. Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the two of them went off together. Now, the Aramaic translation of the Hebrew Bible renders that they went both of them with a perfect heart as one. They went as one together. In John 10:30, Jesus said, I and the Father are one. So verse 9. When they reached the place God had told them about, Abraham built an altar and there arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Now again, if Isaac is a teenager and Abraham is more than 110 years old, what's to stop Isaac pushing his dad out of the way and running for it? But instead, he was obedient. He was obedient to his father, even to the point of death. Philippians 2:8 says, Jesus humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Verse 10. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Verse 11. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Verse 12. Do not lay a hand on the boy. he said, do not do anything to him, because I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Are there times when there are things which we hold so precious that we put them before our relationship with God? And instead of doing God's will, we seek to protect that thing which is precious to us and think that we know better, doing what's right in our eyes, which of course is the sin of Adam and Eve, isn't it? They did what was right in their own eyes. And it's mankind's sin all the way since, doing what's right in your own eyes rather than doing what's right in God's eyes. Verse 13. Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by his horns. Now let's just pause there. When Isaac asked where the lamb for the burnt offering was, what did Abraham say? But what did he say God would provide? The lamb. What have we seen here? A ram. Are there any farmers among us? Is there a difference between a lamb and a ram? A ram's older and bigger. Yeah, it's an adult. Whereas the lamb is young and pure, yeah? Big difference, yes? Right. Was Abraham... Sorry?
Rams can be dangerous and very aggressive.
Right. Rams can be dangerous, they're very aggressive. Don't want to get on the wrong end of a ram, do you? Especially if it's horns. Makes you wonder how he got out of the thicket. Was Abraham wrong in what he said to Isaac when he said God himself will provide a lamb? John chapter 1, verse 29. The next day, John the Baptist saw Jesus coming towards him and said, "Look, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world." Abraham saw it. And Abraham prophesied. In John 8:56, Jesus says, "Your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad." Abraham knew that God himself would provide the lamb. So, we've got a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. What's a thicket? It's a bush made with thorns twisted together. Yes? And the thorns are stuck on the ram's head. In John 19:2, the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and placed it on Jesus' head. So Abraham went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the place, "The Lord will provide." Now, this is how the most English translations render it. Okay? In the Hebrew, if you translate the Hebrew literally, it's more likely to say, "The Lord will see to it." And it's a phrase that we use today, don't we? You know, people will see to it. I'll see to it. God will see to it. Yeah? And don't forget that Moriah, the name for Moriah, was seeing. It was the mountain of seeing. So on the mountain of seeing, God will see to it. Now, let me just read that again, verse 14. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide, the Lord will see to it." And to this day, now this is the narrator popping up. So you know sometimes when you're watching a film or you're reading a book and the narrator, the director, suddenly puts his face to the camera. He's not one of the actors, or one of the actors comes out of character and talks to you. And he says, and to this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. This is the narrator saying to us, hey, did you realize that these events are happening on the mountain of the Lord? Guess what's on the mountain of the Lord in the narrator's time? Solomon's temple. This is the place where Solomon built the temple. So, 1,000 years later, priests would be reenacting this on a daily basis. And the high priest at the time would go into the Holy of Holies and make a sacrifice for himself and for the nation as a whole. Mount Moriah appears only one more time in the Old Testament as the location where the events of David's greatest test took place in 2 Samuel 24. The mountain of the Lord is used only in the Old Testament to refer to Mount Zion, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and we've got references in Isaiah 2 and 30, Micah 4 and Psalm 24. And in 2 Chronicles 3, have we got 2 Chronicles 3, please? No? It was on the service plan. No? Oh well. It says, then Solomon began to build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David. It was on the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite, the place provided by David, which is a reference to 2 Samuel 24. He began building on the 2nd day of the 2nd month in the 4th year of his reign. Now remember what day this was happening on. The 3rd day. The 3rd day of Abraham's sojourn, his journey. And where is it happening? The future location of Solomon's temple, where Levitical priests would make their offerings. Remember in John 2, verses 14 to 21, have we got that? In the temple courts, Jesus found men selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. Of course, what it doesn't say there, this is in the Gentile courts. They turned the court of the Gentiles, where Gentiles were supposed to go and worship God, into a marketplace. So he made a whip of cords and drove them all from the temple area, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, get out of here. How dare you turn my father's house into a market? The Jews then responded to him. What sign? His disciples remembered that it is written, zeal for your house will consume me. The Jews demanded of him, what miraculous sign can you show us to prove your authority to do all of this? And Jesus answered them, destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days. And of course, he was talking about the temple of his body. So we have the reference to the 3rd day in verse 4. And then in verse 6, Isaac, the son who is to be sacrificed, carried the wood that was to become the means by which he was to be sacrificed to the place of sacrifice. Who else carried the wood which he was to be sacrificed on? Jesus. So John 19, 16 to 17. Finally, Pilate handed him over to be crucified. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. On the mountain of the Lord, Mount Moriah, Solomon built the temple. Further up the mountain, towards the peak, was Golgotha, Calvary. Don't know if you've ever thought about this, but what we're looking at here is the fact that both Isaac and Jesus carried the wood that was to be the means of their own sacrifice up the same mountain. And then back to Genesis 22 and verse 15. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord. So again, we've got something slightly confusing here, because up to now it's been the angel and the angel. Now often what's translated as angel in English Bibles actually means messenger, or the one who sends a message. But this is God himself speaking. It's not an angel. I swear by myself, declares the Lord. This is Jesus. That because you have done this, and not withheld your only son, your only son, I will surely bless you. This is not the angel saying I will bless you, this is God saying I will bless you. And make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies. And through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me. Because Abraham obeyed God. It's not just enough to say that you follow God. It's not just enough to say that you believe in God. You need to obey the will of God. Then Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. Both Jesus and Isaac were sons who obeyed their fathers. Both Yahweh and Abraham were willing to sacrifice their own sons, whom they loved more than anything else. But only God went through with it. God did not require Abraham to do it. Because as it says in Jeremiah, it's a detestable practice. And it's only the pagan gods that do that. When it looks like your world is falling apart, when it looks like doom and gloom, when it looks like there's no hope, when it looks like the only options that you've got are the worst options imaginable, what do you do with that? What do you focus on at that point? Do you focus on the thing which is so unimaginable you can hardly comprehend it, to the point where you just want to stay in bed all day? You just can't face the world. Or do you turn to God? There are times in life where it's right to lament. And if you go to the book of Psalms, you'll find that quite a lot of the Psalms are laments. And Andrew read this morning from the book of Lamentations. You know, and if you are in that situation, then find a psalm which speaks to you and use that as a basis of prayer. Cry out to God, call out to God. Use it as a basis of prayer and worship. Yeah. Andrew read the psalm which was on the back of the chair at Ravenscow Hotel. Psalm 121. I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Abraham lifted his eyes up to the mountains of Moriah. Where does my help come from? My help comes from you, the Lord of heaven, the maker of heaven and earth. And then it goes on to say, he will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you by day and night will not let you fall. We need to worship God in times of blessing, and we need to worship God in times of anxiety. There should be no difference in our worship. It's just the difference is where our hearts are at the time, isn't it? But our focus needs to be on God. He is our hope. He is our salvation. He is the greatest thing in our lives. Do we put other things before God, or do we put God first? Do you trust God when he says, I will never leave you nor forsake you? Abraham trusted God that he would get Isaac back from the dead. He thought, well, I might have to go through with this. I might have to actually kill him. But the God of the universe, the creator of heaven and earth, is capable of raising him back from the dead and giving him back to me. I'm sure that was what was in Abraham's mind, at the back of his mind. That was the only way he could think about going on. Jesus trusted his Father to the point of death, as it says in Psalm 16:10. Because you will not abandon me to the realm of the dead. You will not let your Holy One see decay. And remember what Jesus went through in the Garden of Gethsemane. He was in a catatonic state. If you read Luke, the doctor's accounts, he was sweating blood. It was the worst moment of his life, and he felt, apart from when he was on the cross himself, and then he felt separated from God. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? But ultimately, his trust was in the Father, and he was raised from the dead. Abraham's trust was in the Father, and Isaac, figuratively speaking, was raised from the dead, and he got him back again. We need to trust in the Father. Even when life seems at its worst, the Father's love will never fail.